The air here feels different. It's warm, dry, and carries a scent you can't quite place, a sharp, medicinal perfume from the endless grey-green trees. You're standing on the edge of a property in Victoria, a southern state in this vast, sunburnt continent of Australia. The year is 1859. This land is supposed to be your home now, a fresh start, a world of opportunity. But it doesn't feel like home. Not really. The birds don't sing the right songs. In the morning, you're not greeted by the sweet chirping of a European robin or a blackbird. Instead, you hear the raucous, almost maniacal laughter of a kookaburra. The trees aren't soft oaks or familiar weeping willows. They are towering, stringy-barked eucalyptus that shed their bark instead of their leaves. The grass is tough and sparse. And the animals, well, the animals are something else entirely. Creatures that hop on two legs with a tail as a tripod, others that look like clumsy, oversized rodents. It's alien. It's fascinating, sure, but it's also deeply unsettling. You're not alone in this feeling. This sense of displacement, of a profound and aching homesickness, hangs in the air like the ever-present dust. It's a feeling shared by many of your fellow settlers who have traveled thousands of miles from the green, manicured landscapes of Great Britain. Among them is a man named Thomas Austin, a wealthy and well-regarded figure in the colony. He has done well for himself. He owns a sprawling estate, Barwon Park, and has all the success a man could want. But success doesn't cure nostalgia. Every evening, as the sky turns a shade of orange you'd never see back in England, he must look out over his land and feel that same pang of longing. He misses the rolling green hills, the damp earth, the familiar thrill of a proper English hunt. This is a core historical point. The entire disaster began not with malice, but with a simple, powerful desire to make this strange new place feel more like the old one. It was part of a broader, well-intentioned movement of the time known as acclimatization, where settlers around the globe tried to improve their new environments by introducing familiar European species. They saw it as adding a touch of civilization and familiarity to a wild landscape. So one day, Thomas gets an idea, a brilliant idea, he thinks. What this land needs is a bit of proper sport. He wants to be able to ride out with his friends, dogs at his heels, and engage in a traditional rabbit hunt. It's the pastime of a country gentleman, a symbol of the life he left behind. And here's a quirky little detail that often gets lost in the main story. Austin was very particular about what he wanted. He had tried breeding domestic rabbits on his property before, but they were a disappointment. They were too tame, too slow, and had a tendency to stay close to their burrows. There was no sport in it. So he writes a letter to his nephew, William, back in England. He sends a shopping list of fauna he'd like imported. On that list are 72 partridges and a handful of blackbirds, but the most fateful request is for 12 to 20 common wild rabbits. He specifically wanted the wild ones, the tough, cunning, fast-breeding rabbits of the English countryside. He wanted a challenge. You can almost picture him dictating the letter, his mind filled with idyllic images of a Sunday hunt, the chase, the camaraderie. A little piece of England right here in the Australian bush. It's such a simple, seemingly harmless wish. Of course, this is where historians still have lively debates. While Thomas Austin is the man who famously gets the blame for unleashing the plague, some scholars point out that rabbits had been in Australia long before him. The first fleet, arriving in 1788, carried a few domestic rabbits for food. So was Austin truly the sole architect of this disaster? Or was he simply the one who, through a combination of bad luck and a particularly poor choice of species, lit the fuse on a demographic bomb that had been waiting to go off? The argument is that the hardy wild rabbits he imported were uniquely suited to thrive, unlike their tamer, domestic cousins who had been introduced before. We may never know for sure if his were the only ones, but it was his introduction that history remembers as the moment the floodgates opened. For now, though, all of that is in the future. For now, you just see a man trying to soothe his own homesickness. The letter is sealed, sent on a ship bound for England. An order has been placed. Across the world, a nephew is about to go out and catch some rabbits, unaware that he is gathering the furry, twitchy-nosed harbingers of an ecological apocalypse. On your patch of earth in Victoria, all is quiet. You watch the strange hopping creatures in the distance and dream of a familiar green field, perhaps one day dotted with a few familiar brown rabbits. Far across the ocean, in a place that feels impossibly distant, your homesick landowner's wish is being granted. Picture the English countryside, a patchwork of vibrant green fields and ancient stone walls, shrouded in a soft, pearlescent mist. This is where the story truly begins its journey. Thomas Austin's nephew, William, a man we know very little about, receives his uncle's unusual shopping list. It's not a request for fine china or new books. It's a call for living pieces of the homeland. So, William gets to work. You can imagine him, perhaps with a dog and a net, out in the damp twilight, trapping the creatures his uncle so desperately wants. He is not rounding up farm animals. He is capturing wild rabbits, a far trickier business. These aren't docile bunnies, they are skittish, fast, and bred for survival in a landscape filled with foxes, weasels, and hawks. He carefully selects his quarry, ensuring they are healthy and strong. He needs them to survive the coming ordeal. History settles on the number 24, even though the original request was for fewer. Well, stick with 24, as it has become the legendary figure. 24 small, brown, unassuming rabbits, cotton crated, their wild freedom exchanged for a wooden box. Now, imagine the docks, London perhaps, or Liverpool, a chaotic symphony of the 19th century. The air is thick with the smell of coal smoke, tar, salt, and unwashed humanity. Seagulls cry overhead, a counterpoint to the shouts of sailors and the clatter of cargo being winched into the bellies of tall-masted ships. Your 24 rabbits are here, along with the partridges and blackbirds, all part of the same nostalgic shipment. They're just one small crate among mountains of supplies destined for the other side of the world. Their vessel is a ship named the H. S. Lightning. The name is ironic, really, because their journey will be anything but fast. For these rabbits, their entire universe shrinks to the size of a few wooden crates in the dark, swaying hold of the ship. This is not a 5-star, all-inclusive cruise. It is a terrifying, disorienting limbo. The floor beneath them is never still. It lurches, rolls, and pitches with the rhythm of the ocean. The familiar scents of earth and grass are replaced by the musty smell of damp, wouldn't the sharp tang of bilge water. The familiar sounds of the English meadow are gone, replaced by the constant creaking of the ship's timbers, the groan of ropes, and the muffled roar of the waves. For 3 long months, this is their reality. Darkness, movement, and strange noises. They huddle together, a small bundle of trembling life in the vast, indifferent emptiness of the sea. Above them, sailors walk the decks, battling storms and enduring doldrums, likely giving little thought to the furry cargo below. This is a cold, hard fact of the era. Transporting livestock across the ocean was a gamble. Many animals did not survive such journeys. Disease, stress, and poor conditions were rampant. And here's a little detail that academics still quietly ponder: the precise makeup of the shipment. While Thomas Austin specifically requested wild rabbits, historical records can be murky. Is it possible that a few domestic rabbits were mixed in? Did all 24 rabbits that were loaded onto the ship survive the grueling 3-month voyage? Or did some perish with the number 20 for being a convenient rounding of the final count upon arrival? Some historians propose that the success of this particular group was precisely because they were the hardy, wild survivors of a larger batch. They were by definition the toughest of the tough. We can't know for sure. The ship's log was concerned with bigger things than the health of a few bunnies. It's a tiny, fuzzy gray area in a much larger story. You can almost feel the shift when the journey is finally nearing its end. The rhythm of the waves changes. The air that filters down into the hold begins to feel different, thicker, warmer, carrying new and exotic smells. After months at sea, the H. Lightning sails into Port Phillip Bay. The ship anchors, and for the first time in what feels like an eternity, the world stops rocking. Light floods the hold as the hatches are opened. The crate is hoisted up into the blinding glare of the Australian sun. The heat is immediate and intense, so different from the cool dampness of England. The rabbits, blinking in the sudden whiteness, press their noses to the slats of their prison. They smell dust, eucalyptus, and the salty air of a new continent. They hear strange, chattering bird calls. They have arrived. They are carried off the ship, 24 survivors of a perilous voyage. They are unassuming, just a small box of animals in a busy port. No one marks their arrival with any particular fanfare. No one looks at this crate of rabbits and sees a biological time bomb. They are simply a curiosity, a rich man's fancy, a little taste of home delivered to the doorstep of a new world. They have crossed the ocean. They have survived the journey. And now, in the dusty heat of Victoria, they are about to be set free. The next chapter of their story, and of Australia's, is about to begin. The journey from the port to Barwon Park is a jarring, rattling trip over rough-hewn roads. The crate of rabbits is loaded onto a cart, bouncing along under the vast, unfamiliar sky. For you standing on the property, the anticipation is palpable. Thomas Austin is about to realize his dream. HES not just unpacking goods, HES releasing a memory, a piece of his heritage, into the landscape. You watch as the cart finally arrives, pulling up near the grand homestead. Servants and farmhands gather, curious to see the master's latest import from the old country. There's a buzz of excitement. The partridges are cooing, the blackbirds are quiet, and inside one crate, 24 pairs of long ears twitch nervously. The air is warm, the sun is high, and a gentle breeze rustles the leaves of the gray-green trees. It's a perfect day for a new beginning. Thomas Austin himself, a figure of colonial authority and confidence, oversees the operation. He directs his men to carry the crate to a carefully chosen spot on his sprawling estate. This isn't a random act. He has a plan. He wants the rabbits to establish themselves, to breed and multiply just enough to provide a steady source of game for his hunting parties. He has no concept of what HES truly about to do. In his mind, he is an English squire improving his manner. The crate is set down on the dry, grassy earth. A hush falls over the small crowd. The moment has come. A farmhand on Austin's command fumbles with the latch on the wooden door. It creaks open. For a moment, nothing happens. The rabbits, accustomed to the darkness and confinement of their box, hesitate on the threshold of this bright, new world. They are a jumble of brown fur, their noses twitching, trying to process the flood of new information. The scent of alien plants, the feel of the hot sun, the vast, open space. It's overwhelming. Then, one by one, they emerge. A tentative hop, then another. They are cautious at first, their bodies low to the ground, their ears swiveling to catch every sound. They are in a world utterly unlike the one they were born into. There is no soft, damp English soil here, no familiar hedgerows to dart into. There are only strange, tough grasses and trees with peeling bark. This is the historical moment that would be mythologized for a century and a half, Christmas Day, 1859. On this day of celebration and peace, Thomas Austin opened his gift to the Australian countryside. He unleashed what he called a few rabbits, adding that the introduction of a few rabbits could do little harm and might provide a touch of home, in addition to a spot of hunting. This quote, or variations of it, has echoed through history as a classic example of famous last words. He was wrong. Spectacularly apocalyptic ally wrong. The 24 rabbits, now fully emerged from their crate, begin to explore their new surroundings. They hop tentatively into the shade of a eucalyptus tree, their dark eyes taking in the scene. To them, this new world must be both terrifying and exhilarating. The key difference, the one that will seal Australia's fate, is what's missing. Back in England, the sight of an open field would fill a rabbit with a healthy dose of paranoia. Danger was everywhere. A fox could be lurking in the undergrowth, a hawk circling silently overhead. Their every instinct was honed for survival in a world of predators. Here that constant, ambient threat is gone. There are no foxes, no stoats, no weasels. The local predators, like the dingo or the quail, are not adapted to hunt these small, fast-moving mammals. The eagles that soar in the sky above are not the same kind that prey on their European cousins. It's like a group of battle-hardened soldiers being released onto an island with no army. For the first time in their lives, these rabbits are experiencing a world without fear. This is the critical ecological detail. the absence of natural predators. It created a vacuum, and these rabbits were perfectly evolved to fill it. So you watch as they take their first tentative nibbles of Australian vegetation. And here's a quirky, less discussed fact. Many introduced species fail because they can't adapt to the local food source. Australian plants are famously tough, fibrous, and often low in nutrients. But the European rabbit, or ecological unicolus, is a generalist herbivore. It's not a picky eater. It can and will eat almost any plant it can get its teeth on, including the roots and bark when times are tough. The Australian buffet might not be five-star cuisine, but it's more than enough to sustain them. Historians and ecologists still debate the exact genetic makeup of these first 24. Were they all from a single region in England, carrying a very specific set of resilient genes? Or was it simply the combination of their wild nature and the perfect, predator-free environment that created the perfect storm? The consensus leans towards the latter. Austin didn't just release rabbits, he released a species into its ideal unchecked paradise. The small crowd gathered at Barwon Park watches for a while, perhaps chuckling at the rabbit's timid hops. It's a charming scene. A touch of home has indeed been added to the landscape. Thomas Austin must have felt a swell of pride. His plan was a success. He turns, satisfied, and walks back towards his house, leaving the 24 furry pioneers to their own devices. The Pandora's box of Australian ecology has just been pried open. The lid is off. For now, what has been released seems small, cute, and utterly harmless. But as the sun sets over Barwon Park, casting long shadows across the land, the rabbits are just getting started. They are exploring, eating, and doing what rabbits do best. The great conquest of Australia has begun, not with a bang, but with a quiet twitch of the nose. In the weeks and months that follow the grand release at Barwon Park, the rabbits simply exist. And for a while, their existence is a source of delight. You're living in a community starved for familiarity, and these small creatures are a living, breathing reminder of the world you left behind. Imagine you're out for a ride on the edge of Thomas Austin's property. The landscape is still vast and a little intimidating, but now you see something new. In the early morning light, you spot a flicker of movement in the grass, a pair of long ears, a flash of a white tail. It's a rabbit. You might pull your horse to a halt and just watch for a moment. It's a charming sight, a little piece of the English countryside nibbling contentedly under the Australian sun. News of Austin's successful introduction spreads. Visitors to Barwon Park are thrilled. They see the rabbits hopping about the lawns and praise his ingenuity. What a fine thing, Austin, to have brought them out. You can hear them say over tea. Makes the place feel a bit more civilized, eh? It becomes a point of pride, a status symbol. To have wild rabbits on your estate is to have successfully tamed a small corner of this wild continent. You might even receive a pair yourself. A friend, having visited Austin, arrives at your small farmstead with a wicker basket. Inside, two rabbits, their noses twitching nervously. A gift, he says, from Austin's own stock. Let them loose near the creek bed. They'll be happy there. You do as he says, watching as the two small creatures scamper off into the scrub. You feel a sense of satisfaction. You're participating in this grand project of acclimatization, of making this strange land your own. The rabbits, for their part, are having the time of their lives. They have found a paradise that exceeds their wildest rabbit dreams. The climate in southern Victoria is temperate, not unlike parts of southern Europe where their ancestors thrive. The winters are mild, meaning they can breed almost year-round. This is a crucial biological advantage. In Europe, harsh winters would naturally cull the population and pause the breeding cycle. Here, the reproductive engine never really stops. This leads us to the stark mathematics of rabbit breeding, a well-known historical fact. A single female rabbit can produce 5 to 6 litters a year, with up to half a dozen kittens per litter. Her female offspring can start breeding themselves at just 4 months old. It doesn't take a genius to see where this is going. 2 rabbits can become a dozen in a few months. A dozen can become 100 in a year. 100 can become thousands. It's a relentless exponential tide of fur. But in these early days, you don't see the tide. You just see the ripples. You notice more rabbits than before, but it's a good thing, right? Your sons are learning to hunt. They come back from an afternoon out with a few rabbits slung over their shoulders, proud of their contribution to the family larder. Rabbits becomes a common dish on your dinner table. It's cheap, it's plentiful, and it tastes like home. It's not to love. Here's a small, quirky detail of this period. Rabbit fur became a minor commodity. People would trap them not just for meat, but for their pelts. Small-time entrepreneurs could make a bit of extra money selling the skins, which were used to make felt for hats, particularly the iconic kookaburra hat, which would later become a symbol of the Australian outback. So in the beginning, the rabbits were not just a source of food and sport, but also a small-scale economic engine. They were in every conceivable way an asset. The academic debate here is a subtle one, focusing on human perception. When exactly did the rabbit cross the line from being a beloved import to a reviled pest? There was no single day or event. It was a slow, creeping realization, a gradual shift in public consciousness that varied from region to region. Historians who study environmental attitudes point out that for years, even as the numbers swelled, many people remained in a state of denial. They saw more rabbits, yes, but they still saw them as a resource to be managed, not a plague to be eradicated. They were farming the rabbits in a way. The idea that this resource could turn on them was, for a long time, unthinkable. For now you are living in that state of blissful ignorance. The local newspapers might run small, cheerful articles about the burgeoning rabbit population. The sportsman's paradise, one might call it. You read it and nod in agreement. Life is good. The land is providing. As you drift off to sleep, the sounds of the Australian night are subtly changing. Among the chirps of crickets and the distant calls of nocturnal birds, there is a new sound, the soft, almost imperceptible rustle of hundreds, then thousands of small feet moving through the grass. It's the sound of an army gathering its strength, an army you welcomed with open arms. The cute, furry novelty is quietly, inexorably becoming a nightmare, but you don't know it yet. For now you just dream of rabbits too. You're starting to notice that the land itself is changing, but it's a subtle shift, like watching a clock hand move. You don't see it happen, but you know time is passing. The change is in the texture of the ground beneath your feet. The grass near the creek bed, once thick and green, now seems a little thinner, a little more worn down. You chalk it up to a dry spell. This continent is known for them. Let's take a walk through this landscape, this rabbit's paradise, and understand exactly why it was so perfect for them. You need to see this world through their eyes. Imagine you are a rabbit, just a few inches tall. You are standing at the edge of a burrow you've just dug. The soil here is a revelation. In many parts of southern Australia, the soil is light, sandy, and easy to dig. It's perfect for constructing the complex underground warrens, the burrows that are essential for rabbit society and survival. Back in England, you might hit heavy clay or rock. Here it's like digging into a sandbox. So, the first pillar of their success is shelter. They can create vast, interconnected subterranean cities with astonishing speed and ease. These warrens aren't just homes. They are fortresses. They provide protection from the heat of the midday sun, a safe place to raise their young, and a refuge from the few predators that might pose a threat. Now, let's talk about those predators, or rather, the lack thereof. This is the central ecological point of the entire disaster. Australia's ecosystem evolved over millions of years in splendid isolation. Its predators were highly specialized. You have the dingo, a wild dog that is a formidable hunter, but its main prey consists of larger animals, like kangaroos and wallabies. Hunting a tiny, darting rabbit is an inefficient use of its energy. You have large birds of prey, like the wedge-tailed eagle, but their numbers are not high enough to make a significant dent in a population that is breeding exponentially. You might see a snake, a formidable hunter in its own right. But again, snakes are not equipped to be rabbit control specialists. And what about the smaller marsupial carnivores? Like the caw, these native cats are fierce, but they are small and have their own preferred prey of insects, lizards, and small birds. They simply can't compete with the sheer reproductive rate of the rabbit. It's a classic case of what biologists call enemy release hypothesis. An invasive species thrives because it has been released from its natural enemies. So, you have perfect shelter and no effective predators. What's the third piece of the puzzle? food, an endless, all-you-can-eat buffet. You look around at the landscape. The native Australian grasses and shrubs, having evolved without constant grazing pressure from small mammals, have no natural defenses. They are soft, palatable, and nutritious enough for the rabbits. And here's the quirky, lesser-known detail about their eating habits. Rabbits are incredibly destructive grazers. They don't just nibble the tops of the plants like a sheep or a cow. They graze the plants right down to the ground. They will dig up the roots and eat them. They will even eat the seeds, preventing the next generation of plants from ever sprouting. You see a patch of bare earth and think nothing of it. But that bare patch was once a carpet of native seedlings. The rabbits got there first. This eating style is catastrophic. It doesn't just damage the plants, it obliterates them, ensuring they cannot recover. As you walk further, you see the evidence of this everywhere, even if you don't recognize it for what it is. The ground is becoming pockmarked with burrow entrances. The verges of the dirt tracks are bare. The once diverse tapestry of native grasses is being replaced by a monoculture of tougher, rabbit-resistant weeds, or worse, by nothing at all. This is where another academic debate bubbles up. Some ecologists argue that it was just a lack of predators, but also the prior changes made by settlers that paved the way for the rabbit's success. The introduction of sheep and cattle had already begun to change the landscape. The clearing of forests for pastureland created the open spaces that rabbits love. So, were the rabbits invading a pristine wilderness, or were they a secondary invader, capitalizing on an environment already disturbed by European farming practices? The truth, as is often the case, is likely a messy combination of both. The settlers set the table, and the rabbits sat down for the feast. You stoop down and pick up a handful of the soil. It feels different now. It's loose, dusty, and dry. The intricate network of plant roots that once held it together is gone, eaten away from below. You let the soil run through your fingers. It's carried away by the wind, a tiny, insignificant puff of dust. You don't realize you are witnessing the beginning of a national crisis of soil erosion. You're just a farmer worried about your pasture, thinking you need a good, long rain. But the rain, when it comes, will only make things worse. Without the vegetation to absorb it, the water will run across the surface of the land, carrying away the precious topsoil, carving gullies and canyons into the landscape where none existed before. For now, though, you just see more rabbits. They are no longer a charming novelty. They are numerous. They are a constant presence at the edges of your fields, in your vegetable garden, along the roads. They are still a source of meat, yes, but you're getting a little tired of rabbit stew. The cute is worn off. A vague, gnawing sense of unease is beginning to set in. This worst part of the plan. Thomas Austin wanted a touch of home as part of hunting. He didn't want this. Nobody did. But the rabbit's paradise is now fully established. A perfect, self-perpetuating system of food, shelter, and safety. And the consequences of that perfection are about to become terrifyingly clear. The world you once knew, the one of just a few years ago, is gone. The change is no longer subtle, it's a constant, pressing reality. The sheer number of rabbits is something you can't ignore, something you can't explain away. It defies logic. It feels like a biblical plague, a creeping carpet of gray-brown fur that is smothering the land. You wake up in the morning, and the first thing you see isn't the dew on the grass, because there is no grass. You see rabbits, hundreds of them scattered across the bare earth where your pasture used to be. They are a moving, twitching landscape. When you walk out of your house, they don't scatter immediately. They've grown bold. They just hop a few feet away and turn to watch you, their black eyes impassive. This is the phase of 失控的几何级数增长, the explosion of a population that has broken free of all natural constraints. The numbers are staggering, almost impossible to comprehend. Let's pause and consider the math, a core historical element of this story. Within a decade of their release in 1859, the 24 rabbits of Barwon Park had multiplied into the millions. The state of Victoria was completely overrun. They weren't just on Austin's property anymore. They were everywhere. Think about it from your perspective. Last year, you could go out and shoot a dozen rabbits for the pot. This year, you could shoot 100 and it wouldn't make the slightest difference. For every one you remove, It feels like 10 more appear overnight. They are born in the darkness beneath your feet, in the sprawling, unseen warrens that have turned the very foundations of your land into a hollow honeycomb. You start to see things you've never seen before. During the day, the land looks devastated but relatively empty, as the rabbits are mostly nocturnal or crepuscular, meaning they are active at dawn and dusk. But at twilight, the true scale of the invasion is revealed. As the sun dips below the horizon, the ground itself seems to come alive. From thousands of burrow holes, a torrent of rabbits emerges. It's a silent, relentless flood. They pour out onto the plains to begin their nightly ritual of feeding, of stripping the land bare. You stand on your porch and watch the spectacle with a growing sense of horror. It's mesmerizing and terrifying at the same time. The scale is so immense that it feels like a force of nature, like a flood or a fire. You feel powerless against it. And here's a bizarre, little-known consequence of this population boom. The rabbits started to change their own behavior. In such high-density conditions, rabbits, which are normally territorial, had to adapt. Biologists studying modern invasive populations have noted that in these extreme scenarios, their social structures can break down. The constant competition for food and space leads to stress, increased aggression, and sometimes even cannibalism of the young. The rabbit's paradise was becoming a high-stress, overcrowded slum. You wouldn't see this directly, but you would see the effects: desperate, starving rabbits pushing into new territories, trying to escape the pressure of their own numbers. This desperation is what fuels their incredible expansion. They are not just breeding, they are migrating. A river of rabbits is on the move, constantly pushing at the frontiers of their territory in search of fresh food. The academic world still expresses a degree of awe at the sheer speed of this expansion. It's one of the fastest invasions by a mammal ever recorded. Calculations suggest the rabbit front advanced across the continent at a rate of about 130 kilometers or 80 miles per year. That's an astonishing pace. They didn't just walk. They ate their way across Australia. Think of it as a slow-motion biological wildfire, consuming everything in its path. Historians debate whether there was a single moment when the collective mood shifted from annoyance to genuine panic. Perhaps it was the first time a farmer went completely bankrupt, his grazing land so utterly destroyed that he had to abandon his property. Or perhaps it was when the town started to be affected, with rabbits digging up public parks and vegetable gardens, their burrows causing roads and even the foundations of buildings to collapse. For you, the moment of panic might be personal. You go to check on your small flock of sheep, your main source of income. You find them thin and weak, their ribs showing. There is simply not enough food for them. The rabbits have eaten everything. The land can no longer support your livestock. You look at the barren fields, at the hopping swarms, and you feel a cold dread creep into your heart. This isn't a pest problem anymore. This is a threat to your survival. You talk to your neighbors. Everyone has the same story. The initial charm is a bitter memory. The gift of rabbits has become a curse. The man who started it all, Thomas Austin, is no longer seen as a clever squire. He is now the man who opened Pandora's box. He himself reportedly lamented his actions later in life, realizing the catastrophic scale of what he had done. He spent the rest of his days trying to eradicate the rabbits from his own property, a futile, ironic battle against the monster of his own creation. As you lie in bed at night, you can hear them, a faint, constant scratching and scrabbling from beneath the floorboards. They are under your house. They are everywhere. The geometric progression is complete. The numbers are no longer countable. They have achieved complete and utter saturation of the landscape. The quiet brown creatures have become a conquering army, and you are living in occupied territory. The world, which once felt so vast and empty, now feels claustrophobic, small, shrunken by the relentless pressure of the rabbit tide. The problem is no longer confined to your farm, or your neighbor's farm, or even the state of Victoria. The rabbit army is on the march, and their campaign of conquest is relentless and terrifyingly efficient. You're living through one of the most astonishing biological invasions in history. This isn't a slow, generational creep. It's a blitzkrieg. You hear stories from travelers, from letters that arrive weeks after they were sent. The news is always the same: the rabbits are coming. Or rather, the rabbits are already there. Let's trace their path on a map. Imagine southern Victoria in 1860, a small pocket of rabbit infestation. Now watch as that pocket bleeds outwards. They move north, crossing the mighty Murray River into New South Wales. How does a rabbit cross a river? They are surprisingly good swimmers when they need to be, but mostly they didn't need to swim. During dry spells, the rivers would shrink, and they could cross on fallen logs or at shallow points. They are adaptable and opportunistic. Once in New South Wales, they find a new paradise. The vast, open plains of the riverina region are perfect for them. More light soils for burrowing, more wide open spaces, and still no effective predators. The process repeats itself, but on an even grander scale. The population explodes once more, and the wave of rabbits continues its northward and westward push. You hear reports that feel like something out of a fantasy novel. Shepherds talk of living seas of fur. They describe how, at dusk, entire hillsides seem to move, shimmering with the movement of tens of thousands of rabbits. They talk of how the ground is so thoroughly burrowed that it's dangerous to ride a horse at speed, as the animal could snap a leg in a hidden rabbit hole. This becomes a genuine and widespread danger across rural Australia. By the 1882, less than 30 years after their introduction, they have saturated New South Wales and are pushing into South Australia and Queensland. In South Australia, they encounter the Nullarbor Plain, a vast, arid, and seemingly impassable expanse of limestone bedrock with almost no trees. Surely, this would stop them, but it doesn't. This is where the sheer desperation and adaptability of the rabbits becomes clear. They learn to survive in this harsh environment, getting moisture from eating roots and succulents, sheltering from the searing heat in caves and limestone sinkholes instead of traditional burrows. This is a key point for understanding their success. They are not just breeding machines. They are incredible pioneers. They adapt to new climates, on new terrains with breathtaking speed. They conquer the arid interior just as easily as they conquered the temperate south. And here's a quirky, often overlooked detail of their great march. They were helped by humans. Not intentionally, of course. But the new infrastructure of the colonies, the railway lines and stock routes, became highways for the rabbits. They would follow these cleared paths, finding it easier to travel and discovering new sources of water at railway sidings or stock wells. We built the roads for our own expansion, and they simply hopped along beside us. The academic debate here centers on the concept of invasion meltdown. This is a theory in ecology that suggests once one invasive species becomes established, it can facilitate the invasion of other species. In Australia, the rabbits created a perfect storm. Their grazing destroyed the native ground cover, which allowed invasive weeds from Europe, plants that worm or resistant to grazing, to take hold. So, you end up with a landscape transformed twice over, first by the loss of native plants, and second by their replacement with foreign weeds. The rabbits weren't just invaders, they were ecosystem engineers, terraforming the continent to their own detriment and ours. From your small homestead, you feel this expansion as a tightening knot of dread. The rabbits on your land are no longer just your problem. They are part of a continental swarm, an unstoppable force. It feels like you are on a small island, and the sea level is rising, and the water is made of rabbits. You might see evidence of their great journey firsthand. A family from a neighboring district, their farm ruined, might pass by your property on a wagon loaded with their meager possessions. They are heading west or north or anywhere they think the rabbits haven't reached yet. They are ecological refugees, displaced by a furry tide. They tell you stories of what's coming, of a land so utterly consumed that nothing is left but dust and burrows. By the turn of the century, in just over 40 years, the rabbits have done what no human army could ever do. They have colonized almost the entire southern half of the continent, an area larger than Western Europe. From the temperate coasts of Victoria to the scorching deserts of the interior, from the east coast to the west, they are there. The front line of the invasion has reached the shores of Western Australia. The 24 rabbits released at Bowen Park have spawned a dynasty that now numbers in the hundreds of millions. Some estimates from this period put the population as high as 600 million, though it's impossible to know for sure. The Great Trek is, for now, complete. They have conquered a continent. And in the wake of their victory, they have left a trail of devastation that is only just beginning to be understood. The grand continental conquest is complete, but the war is now being fought on a different front. It's no longer about territory. It's about what's left of the land itself. The rabbits have won the battle for space, and now you are living with the grim consequences of their occupation. The most visible of these is the slow, agonizing death of the plant life. Let's go for another walk. But this time, we're not looking for rabbits. We're looking for what the rabbits have left behind. Step out of your farmhouse. The ground around it is bare, compacted dust. It's like a beaten earth floor extending for acres in every direction. Where you once had a small garden with vegetables and herbs, there is now nothing. You gave up on that long ago. Any seedling that dared to poke its head above the soil was devoured within hours. You walk towards what used to be a small patch of native woodland. The trees are still standing, proud and ancient eucalyptus, but the forest floor is gone. The understory, the complex, vibrant community of shrubs, grasses, orchids, and lilies that once grew here has been annihilated. It's like a sterile park. The ground is bare except for a scattering of dry leaves on rabbit droppings. This is the core ecological disaster, the widespread destruction of native vegetation. Rabbits are selective feeders in a very specific way. They go for the softest, most palatable plants first. Unfortunately, in Australia, this often meant they were targeting the seedlings of dominant, long-lived species like saltbush and mulga trees. They weren't just eating the grass, they were eating the future. By devouring the young plants, they were effectively sterilizing the landscape, preventing the bush from regenerating. An old tree would die, and nothing would grow to replace it. You kneel down and look closely at the base of a young acacia tree, a wattle. The bark has been gnawed away in a ring around the trunk. This is called ring barking. The rabbits, in times of drought when other food is scarce, will turn to eating the bark of trees and shrubs. By stripping it all the way around, they destroy the foam, the layer of tissue that transports nutrients from the leaves to the roots. The tree is effectively starved to death. It may look alive for a few more months, but it is already a ghost. You see this everywhere. A landscape of dying shrubs of old trees with no successors. The vibrant, multi-layered ecosystem is being simplified, reduced to a two-dimensional world of old trees and bare dirt. And here's a quirky, sad little detail that illustrates the scale of this loss. Australia is home to an incredible diversity of native orchids, many of which are small, delicate, and grow low to the ground. For a rabbit, these are an irresistible sweet treat. Entire species of orchids were likely eaten into extinction before they were even formally described by botanists. We have no record of them. They are ghosts lost to history, their memory existing only as a brief, tasty snack for a rabbit. This leads to a point of ongoing research and debate among botanists and ecologists. Can these landscapes ever truly recover? Even if all the rabbits were to vanish tomorrow, would the native vegetation return? In some areas, the answer is a heartbreaking no. The seed bank, the natural store of seeds in the soil, has been so completely depleted that there is nothing left to germinate. The original plant community is gone forever. In other areas, recovery is possible but might take centuries, and the ecosystem that returns may be a pale imitation of the one that was lost. The argument continues over how, and even if, we should actively try to restore these ghost ecosystems. From your perspective, this is not an academic debate. It is your daily reality. You see the land weakening, becoming brittle. The once resilient bush seems to have lost its life force. The scents are different now. The air used to be filled with the sweet honeyed smell of flowering grevillea or the sharp scent of peronia. Now, it just smells of dust. This loss of vegetation has a devastating domino effect. The small, insect-eating birds that lived in the understory have vanished because their habitat is gone. The native insects, reliant on specific host plants, have disappeared. The delicate web of life, woven over millennia, is being unraveled thread by thread, all because of the voracious appetite of one small, furry herbivore. You look out at the horizon. The setting sun casts a red glow over a silent, barren landscape. It looks clean, almost tidy, in its emptiness, But you know this is the tidings of a graveyard. You are witnessing the browning of a continent. Thomas Austin wanted to add a touch of home, to make the landscape more familiar. In a way, he succeeded beyond his wildest dreams. The Australian bush, in its ravaged state, was beginning to look less like itself and more like a desert. An empty, desolate, man-made desert, created not by a lack of water, but by an abundance of teeth. The silence of the dying bush is one thing, but the silence from your own livestock is another. It's a heavier silence filled with the weight of impending ruin. The ecological disaster is no longer a distant, abstract concept. It has arrived at your doorstep and is now sitting at your dinner table, eating your future. You stand at the fence line of what used to be your best sheep paddock. The fence posts are leaning, the wire is slack. There's no point in maintaining it anymore. There's nothing inside to keep in, and nothing outside to keep out. The paddock is a sheet of baked, cracked earth. A few hardy, inedible weeds cling to life, but there is not a single blade of edible grass. This is the reality for tens of farmers and pastoralists across the country. The rabbits are in direct competition with livestock for food, and it's a competition that sheep and cattle cannot win. This is a crucial economic point in the story. Rabbits are far more efficient grazers than sheep. They can survive on much poorer vegetation, and their sharp incisors can crop plants down to a level that a sheep's mouth can't reach. Where a sheep sees a barren field, a rabbit can still find a meal. So, your sheep are starving. You walk among them. They are listless. Their wool is ragged, and their bones jut out. You've had to sell off most of your flock for a pittance, just to cut your losses. The ones that are left are the hardy few, the survivors, but they won't last another season like this. Your entire livelihood, the farm that your family has poured its sweat and blood into for a generation, is collapsing. You hear the desperate cries everywhere. At the local market, the talk is not of wool prices or cattle weights. It's of rabbits. Men, their faces etched with worry and sun, gather in small groups, their voices low and angry. Lost another 100 acres, one might say. They've eaten the roots right out of the ground. It's finished. Another might talk about how he has to pay men to do nothing but shoot rabbits all day, a cost he can't afford, for a result that makes no difference. This is the period when the term rabbit-proof fence enters the vocabulary, not as a grand government project yet, but as a desperate local measure. You and your neighbors might band together. You spend weeks, months, working under the brutal sun, trying to erect a fence around a small, choice piece of land. You use wire netting, a new and expensive commodity. You dig the netting into the ground to stop them from burrowing under. You strain the wire tight and pray it will hold. For a while it might work. Inside the fence, a small patch of green begins to return. It looks like an oasis in the middle of the desert you now inhabit. But the pressure on the fence is immense. Thousands of rabbits, drawn to the sight and smell of the green grass, congregate along the wire. They dig, they push, they search for any weakness. A gate left open for 5 minutes, a hole eroded by a rainstorm, a fallen branch that tears the wire, that's all it takes. One morning you wake up and your green oasis is gone, consumed overnight. The despair that follows is profound. It feels like the forces of nature themselves are conspiring against you. Here's a bizarre, little-known detail from this time. The desperation lead to some strange and sad outcomes. There are accounts of rabbit drives, where entire communities would turn out to try and herd rabbits into a netted enclosure. Men, women, and children would form a long line and walk across the landscape, banging pots and pans, shouting, trying to drive the animals before them. At the end, thousands of rabbits would be trapped and killed. It was a brutal, grim business born of utter desperation. It gave people a sense of doing something, but it was like trying to empty the ocean with a bucket. The historical debate here revolves around the long-term economic impact. Some economic historians argue that the rabbit plague was the single greatest disaster to ever hit Australian agriculture, far worse than any drought or flood. It fundamentally reshaped the country as farming practices and led to the financial ruin of countless families. Others suggest that while the impact was devastating, it also forced a degree of innovation, leading to the development of new fencing technologies and land management strategies. They argue that the crisis, in its own brutal way, helped to modernize Australian farming. But for you, living through it, it doesn't feel like innovation. It feels like the end of the world. The sound you hear now is the sound of absence. The bleating of a healthy flock of sheep is gone. The lowing of cattle is gone. They have been replaced by the quiet, relentless chewing of millions of rabbits. The wealth of the nation, which for so long was said to ride on the sheep's back, is being devoured from the ground up. You look at your hands, calloused and cracked from years of farm work. They feel useless now. All your knowledge of animal husbandry, of crop rotation, of reading the weather, it all means nothing. You've been defeated by a creature you could hold in one hand. The apathetic stare of the rabbit has become a symbol of your own impotence. It sits on your ruined land, a tiny, furry king on a throne of dust, and there is absolutely nothing you can do about it. The howls of despair are rising from every corner of the continent, and soon the government will have no choice but to listen. The cries of desperation from the countryside have finally become too loud for the politicians in the cities to ignore. The rabbit problem is no longer a rural issue, it's a national crisis. The economy is bleeding. The very productivity of the continent is at stake. The government, a collection of men in suits who may have never seen a rabbit outside of a cage, is forced to act. So begins the era of the government's first counterattack. It's a war declared with official proclamations and parliamentary debates, but on the ground it's a messy, disorganized, and ultimately futile struggle. You are now a soldier in this war, whether you want to be or not. The first and most straightforward government response is the bounty system. This is a classic historical approach to pest control. The government of New South Wales in 1883 passes the Rabbit Nuisance Act. It's a grand-sounding piece of legislation that essentially does one thing. It puts a price on a rabbit's head. Or, more accurately, on its scalp or tail. Suddenly a new profession is born, the rabbit trapper or rabbi too. You see them passing through your area, weary men on horseback with packs of dogs and stacks of traps. They are a rough and ready bunch, drawn to the promise of quick cash. For a while there's a sense of hope. Surely, if enough men are out there killing rabbits for a living, the numbers must go down. You might even try it yourself. You spend your days trapping and skinning, taking the grim trophies into the local police station or government office to claim your bounty. At first, the money is good. The rabbits are so numerous that you can collect hundreds of scalps in a single day. The government coffers are drained as millions of pounds are paid out to trappers across the states. But a fatal flaw in the system soon becomes apparent. The rabbits breed faster than they can be tracked. The rabbitoists are essentially just harvesting the surplus, not denting the core population. Worse, the system creates perverse incentives. This is the quirky, dark side of the bounty system. Unscrupulous trappers soon realize that their livelihood depends on a steady supply of rabbits. Why would they want to eradicate their source of income? There are documented cases of trappers capturing live rabbits, breeding them in secret enclosures, and then harvesting the offspring for the bounty. Some would even just cut the scalps or tails off and release the rabbit to breed again. The system, designed to solve the problem, was in some ways helping to perpetuate it. The government, realizing the bounty system is a failure and a financial black hole, tries other tactics. They establish government-run extermination teams. These are organized groups of men, armed with poisons and fumigants, who travel from property to property, trying to systematically clear the land. You see them arrive at your farm, a wagon full of grim-looking equipment. They bring with them new, terrifying weapons. Carbon bisulfide, a volatile and flammable liquid, is used to fumigate burrows. They pour it into the warren entrances and seal them up, hoping to asphyxiate the rabbits underground. They also use poison. Strychnine-laced carrots or grain are scattered across the land. This is a key historical point, the beginning of large-scale chemical warfare in the Australian bush, and it comes with its own set of disasters. The poisons are indiscriminate. They kill not just rabbits, but native animals too. Wallabies, kangaroos, possums, and birds are found dead near the poison baits. Your own farm dogs are at risk. The land becomes contaminated. It's a scorched earth policy that seems to harm everything except the target. The rabbits with their sheer numbers can absorb the losses. The native wildlife cannot. Historians and environmental scientists still debate the long-term ecological damage caused by these early poisoning campaigns. How many native animal populations were pushed towards extinction by these efforts? The records are poor, but the anecdotal evidence suggests the toll was immense. It's a classic case of the cure being almost as bad as the disease, a theme that will repeat itself throughout this long war. So you watch as the government men work. They are efficient, professional, and deadly. For a week, your land is eerily quiet. The constant, twitching presence of the rabbits is gone. There is a sliver of hope. But then, a few weeks later, you see them. A few rabbits at first emerging from deep unfumigated burrows, or migrating in from your neighbor's uncleared property. And the cycle begins again. The rabbits have an endless supply of reinforcements. You do not. The government's first counter-offensive is a resounding failure. They have thrown money, manpower, and chemicals at the problem, and the problem has simply shrugged. The rabbit population may dip locally for a short time, but on a continental scale, the wave is still cresting. The mood in the country sours from desperation to a grim cynicism. You've seen the bounties fail, the trapping fail, the poisoning fail. You've seen your own desperate efforts with fences fail. The rabbit seems invincible, a foe that cannot be beaten by conventional means. There is a sense that a new type of thinking is needed. A bigger idea. A grander, more audacious plan. If you can't kill them all where they are, maybe, just maybe, you can stop them from getting to where they aren't. The seed of a truly colossal idea is beginning to germinate in the minds of the men in power. The failure of the early counterattacks, the bounties, the poisons, the trapping has left a bitter taste in every owner's mouth. The enemy is too numerous, too widespread, too resilient. A new strategy is needed. The thinking shifts from eradication to containment. If you can't win the war in the occupied territories, you must at all costs protect the lands that are still free. Your attention, and the attention of the entire nation, now turns to the west. Western Australia. It's like a separate country, a vast, isolated state separated from the east by thousands of kilometers of desert. It is, for now, largely rabbit-free. It is the last bastion, the final frontier. But the rabbit army is on the march, advancing relentlessly across the Nullarbor Plain. The front line is getting closer every day. The government of Western Australia watches this slow-motion invasion with mounting terror. They have seen the ruin in the eastern states. They have seen the failed policies. They know what is coming. In 1901, the year the separate Australian colonies federate into a single nation, a royal commission is established to solve this one existential problem. How do you stop the unstoppable? The commission hears all sorts of ideas, from the practical to the utterly bizarre. But one idea, a concept of breathtaking audacity and scale, begins to gain traction. It's an idea born of desperation and the kind of bold, nation-building thinking that characterized the era. The idea is this: if you can't trap the rabbits, you must fence them out. Not just a bit out, not just a farm. You must fence them out of an entire state. The plan is to build the longest fence in the world, a barrier that will stretch from the southern coast to the northern coast, a line in the sand to halt the furry tide. This is the birth of the State Barrier Fence of Western Australia, more famously known as the Rabbit-Proof Fence. It's a project that is, on paper, almost insane. You are proposing to build a fence, by hand, through some of the most remote and inhospitable terrain on the planet. Imagine you are one of the planners. You unroll a huge map of Western Australia. With a ruler and a pencil, you draw a line. The line begins at Starvation Boat Harbor on the south coast. From there, it goes north, straight north, for 1833 kilometers. That's over 1,100 miles. It crosses salt lakes, dense scrubland granite outcrops, and scorching deserts. It is a line that ignores geography, topography, and common sense. It is a line of pure, defiant hope. The specifications for this fence are meticulously detailed. It needs to be made of sturdy wooden posts, strung with multiple strands of plain and barbed wire. And, crucially, it must have a layer of wire netting dug into the ground to prevent burrowing, and rising high enough that a rabbit cannot jump over it. Gates must be built at regular intervals to allow for the passage of people and wagons, gates that must be kept closed at all times. The logistical challenge is immense. This is the core historical achievement of the fence, not its effectiveness but its construction. Everything has to be brought in. The wire, the netting, the tools, the food and water for the hundreds of men who will build it. And it all has to be transported by camel trains, the ships of the desert that were the only reliable form of transport in the deep outback. Here's a quirky detail of the planning phase. There was intense debate about the exact route. Surveyors led by a man named Alfred Canning were sent out to map the proposed line. Their expeditions were epic journeys of survival in themselves. They had to find sources of water, navigate through trackless wilderness, and deal with the extreme heat, all while charting a path for a fence that existed only in theory. This grand plan is, of course, a source of major controversy. Historians still argue about the political motivations. Was it a genuine, well-thought-out plan, or was it a massive act of political theater? A way for the government to be seen to be doing something dramatic and decisive, even if its success was a long shot. Some critics at the time called it Canning's folly, a colossal waste of money that was doomed from the start. They argued that the rabbits were already moving too fast, that they would simply be on the western side of the fence before it was even finished. But the proponents win the day. The fear of the rabbit plague is so great that any solution, no matter how ambitious or expensive, seems worth trying. The project is approved. The materials are ordered. The recruitment call goes out for men willing to take on this monumental task. From your perspective in the ravaged eastern states, the news of the Great Fence is a strange thing. It's a source of a kind of distant, vicarious hope. You look at your own ruined land and imagine a place where a single line of wire might hold back the apocalypse. But it's also a sign of surrender. It is an admission that your land, the land east of the fence, is being sacrificed. It is being written off as a lost cause, a containment zone for the plague. The decision has been made. The pencils have been put down. The contracts have been signed. On the far side of the continent, a new war is about to begin. Not a war of poison and traps, but a war of engineering and brute force. A war against the desert, against distance, and against time, all to erect a thin, frail line of wire against a multi-million-strong army of rabbits. The grand, audacious plan is now in motion. The ink is dry. The orders are given. Now begins the unglamorous back-breaking reality of turning a line on a map into a physical barrier. You are no longer a farmer or a planner. You are now one of the men who built the fence. The year is 1901. You've signed on for what you've been told is steady government work. You have no idea what you're in for. Your journey begins in a dusty, sun-bleached depot. You are given basic tools, an axe, a shovel, a pair of wire strainers. Your transportation is a camel, a grumpy, spitting beast that smells like old socks but is the only thing reliable out here. You join a caravan, a long snaking line of men camels, and supply wagons, and you head out into the vast, silent emptiness of the western Australian interior. The work is brutally simple and mind-numbingly repetitive. First comes the clearing crew. You walk the surveyed line, a straight track cut through the bush. Your job is to clear a path, 10 feet wide, on either side of the fence line. You chop down tough mulga scrub and resilient salt bush with an axe. The sun is relentless. The heat shimmers off the red earth and the air is thick with flies that crawl into your eyes, your nose, your mouth. Then come the post-getters. These men venture further out, searching for suitable trees, usually mulga, gimlet, or salmon gum, to cut down for fence posts. They chop them to length and drag them back to the line. It's heavy, splintery work. Then you, part of the main construction gang, begin the real work. You dig the post holes. The ground can be as hard as concrete or as soft as sand. You dig hundreds of holes a day, your hands blistering, your back screaming in protest. You place the posts, tamping the earth down around them until they are firm. Then comes the wiring. You unspool massive, heavy rolls of wire netting and plain wire. You stretch it, strain it until it sings with tension, and then staple it to the posts. The most crucial part is burying the netting 6 inches deep into the ground, creating the underground barrier to stop the rabbits from digging under. Day after day, this is your life. Dig, lift, stretch, staple. The fence grows behind you, a thin, lonely line stretching to the horizon in both directions. The silence of the outback is immense. Your world shrinks to the 10-foot clearing, the sweat in your eyes, the ache in your muscles, and the small group of men you work with. This is the central historical narrative of the fence, the human cost. The men who built it lived in harsh, primitive conditions. They slept in canvas tents or simple bough shelters. Their food was basic mutton, damper, a simple bread cooked in campfire ashes, and jam washed down with heavily sweetened black tea. Fresh water was the most precious commodity, often rationed and sometimes of poor quality. Sickness, like scurvy or dysentery, was a constant threat. And here's a quirky, specific detail of their daily life: the camel trains. These were the lifeline. A man known as a camel puncher would lead a train of up to 30 camels, each laden with supplies, trekking for weeks to reach the construction teams at the head of the line. The arrival of the camel train was the most exciting event. It meant fresh supplies, mail from home, and news from the outside world. It was a brief connection to the civilization you had left so far behind. Of course, the construction was plagued with problems. White ants or termites would devour the wooden posts, sometimes within a few months of them being put in the ground. Flash floods could wash away entire sections of the fence, leaving behind a tangled mess of wire that had to be painstakingly repaired. Bushfires were a constant threat, capable of destroying miles of posts in a single afternoon. The academic debate surrounding the construction focuses on its efficiency and management. It was a government project, and like many such projects, it was beset by bureaucratic delays, political squabbling, and accusations of mismanagement. The initial contractor failed to meet his targets, and the government had to take over direct control of the project. Historians still analyze the public works records to understand the immense financial and logistical struggles. Was it a model of outback ingenuity or a case study in government waste? The answer is probably both. You don't care about the politics. You care about the next water hole, the heat, and the soul-crushing monotony. You work alongside a diverse group of men. Hard-bitten outback veterans, young adventurers, new immigrants looking for work. You form a rough camaraderie, a bond forged in shared hardship. You tell stories around the campfire at night, under a dome of stars, so bright they feel close enough to touch. Slowly, painstakingly, the fence takes shape, my laughter grueling mile. It is an act of sheer human will, a testament to the stubbornness of an idea. You are not just building a fence, you are drawing a line against a plague. You are a soldier on the front line of a very strange war, armed with a shovel and an axe. You don't know if this incredible, back-breaking effort will work. You just know that you have to keep going, one post at a time, into the vast, unforgiving heart of the continent. After 6 long, grueling years, the work is finally done. The year is 1907. The last post has been hammered into the ground, the last strand of wire strained tight. You stand back and look at what you and hundreds of other men have built. One rabbit-proof fence, a thin, dark line of wire and wood, stretching from the cold waters of the Southern Ocean to the dry, dusty north, cutting the state of Western Australia in two. It is a monumental achievement of engineering and human endurance, the longest fence in the world. A proud, defiant symbol of humanity's war against the rabbit, and it is an almost complete and utter failure. The truth is, the fence was doomed from the start. This is the tragic, ironic heart of the story. While you were toiling in the desert, clearing the scrub and digging the post holes, the rabbits were not waiting politely on the other side. The enemy had already breached the perimeter. The simple, heartbreaking fact is that rabbits were found west of the fence line before the fence was even completed. The front line of the rabbit invasion had moved faster than the construction crews. Small pockets of rabbits, the vanguard of the main army, had already established themselves in the agricultural lands the fence was designed to protect. How did this happen? They didn't burrow under the unfinished fence or hop over it. They simply went around it. The fence line started in the south and was built northwards. The rabbits, advancing across the Null Arbor, simply outflanked the northern end of the construction line and bored into the unprotected grasslands beyond. The government's reaction was a mixture of panic and denial. They immediately commissioned more fences. The fence was built roughly parallel to the first, further west to try and contain the breaches that had already occurred. It ran for 1165 kilometers. Then, a smaller now. 3 fence was built on an east-west axis to act as another internal barrier. All told, over 3,256 kilometers, more than 2,000 miles of fencing were erected. It was a classic case of throwing good money after bad. The state had invested so much political and financial capital into the idea of the fence that they cowed and just admit defeat. They had to be seen to be reinforcing the strategy, even if it was already failing. Now your job changes. You are no longer a builder, you are a picket or a boundary rider. Your job is to patrol a specific section of the fence. You live a life of incredible isolation. You are assigned a stretch of maybe 100 miles of fence line. You live in a small, lonely hut. Your only companions are your horse and your camels. Your daily routine is to ride the line. You look for damage, a fallen tree that has crushed a section, a place where a mob of kangaroos has pushed through, a hole dug by a wombat or eroded by a flood. You carry tools with you and you make repairs on the spot. You also carry a rifle, and you are to shoot any rabbits you see on the clean or western side of the fence. You are the guardian of a leaking dam, trying to plug the holes with your bare hands. Here's a quirky and poignant detail about the life of a boundary rider. The fence post mail. With no regular postal service, news and messages were passed along the fence line. A traveler heading north might leave a letter for you in a tin can wedged into a fence post. You would collect it, and perhaps leave a reply for the next person heading south to pick up. The fence itself became a lonely line of communication through the vast wilderness. The academic debate here is fierce and fascinating. Why did the government and the public cling to the idea of the fence for so long, even when it was demonstrably failing? Some social historians argue it was a form of magical thinking. The fence was such a powerful symbol, such a tangible representation of the fight against chaos, that people needed to believe in it. To admit the fence was a failure was to admit that the rabbits were uncontrollable, a thought terrifying to contemplate. It was a psychological barrier as much as a physical one. It provided a sense of order in a world that had descended into ecological chaos. You, the boundary rider, know the truth. You see it every day. You follow the tracks in the sand. You see where the rabbits have gotten through. You shoot one on the western side, and the next day you see 2 more. You are engaged in a heroic, lonely, and ultimately pointless task. The rabbits that were already inside the line are breeding, creating their own pockets of infestation that are growing and merging. The Great Fence, the monumental effort that consumed years of men's lives and a vast fortune, stands as a hollow monument. It is a testament to what humans can build, but also a lesson in the futility of trying to impose simple, linear solutions on a complex ecological problem. The rabbits didn't read the government reports. They didn't respect the lines drawn on the map. They just did what they always do. They ate, they dug, and they bred. The fortress had been breached before its walls were even finished. The war for Western Australia was already lost. The failure of the Great Fence is a turning point. The grand, engineering-based solution has failed. The conventional weapons of trapping and poisoning have failed. The mood of the country shifts from organized resistance to a kind of frenzied, desperate improvisation. If the big, sensible ideas don't work, maybe the small, crazy ones will. This is the era of bizarre inventions and potential, a testament to human ingenuity in the face of overwhelming odds. You're back on your farm in the east, or perhaps you're a frustrated landowner in the newly infested west. The government's grand plans have come to nothing. It's up to you now. Every farmer becomes an inventor. Every rural community a laboratory for pest control. The newspapers and local gazettes of the time are filled with suggestions and advertisements for new, guaranteed rabbit-killing devices. It's a wild marketplace of hope, and charlatan is in. You see ads for complex, spring-loaded traps that promise to launch rabbits into the air. You hear about contraptions designed to electrocute them on contact with a wire. Most of these are impractical, expensive, and completely ineffective against a population of millions. One of the most common and widespread tactics developed during this period is large-scale ripping. A team of horses or a steam-powered traction engine is used to drag a series of heavy, deep plowing tines through the ground. The goal is to destroy the warrens, to physically break up the rabbits' underground cities. You might spend weeks painstakingly ripping your entire property, the machine shaking the very earth, collapsing the tunnels and burying the inhabitants alive. It's a brutal, destructive process. For a while, it works. The land is cleared, but you've also destroyed the soil structure. And it only takes a few surviving rabbits from a neighboring property to move in and start digging again. Then comes the age of chemical warfare, but on more personal, DIY scale. People experiment with all sorts of poisonous gases to fumigate burrows. Some use phosphorus sticks, which, when they come into contact with damp soil, release deadly phosphine gas. These methods are incredibly dangerous for the user. Accidents are common. People are poisoned by their own weapons. Perhaps the most dramatic and ill-advised tactic is the use of explosives. This becomes a strangely popular idea. The theory is simple. Place a stick of dynamite or a charge of gelignite deep inside a warren. Light the fuse and run. The resulting explosion would, in theory, collapse the entire warren system and kill everyone inside. You can imagine the scene: a farmer, frustrated beyond measure, standing in his field, plugging his ears as the ground erupts in a shower of dirt and dross. It's a satisfying solution. It feels like you're finally fighting back with real force. But it's also incredibly inefficient. You might destroy one warren, but there are 100 more on the same acre, and you've just created a large, inviting crater of loose soil, perfect for a new rabbit to start a new home. This is a key historical point: the decentralization of the war effort. The failure of the state-led initiatives threw the responsibility back onto individuals, fostering a culture of rugged, often reckless self-reliance. It also created a deep-seated mistrust of government solutions that persists in some rural communities to this day. Here's a truly quirky and documented example of this desperate innovation. A man in South Australia in the early 20th century proposed the construction of a biological fence. His idea was to breed and release thousands of feral cats along a designated line. He believed the cats would form a living, self-perpetuating barrier that would prey on the advancing rabbits. Thankfully, the idea was rejected, as officials rightly pointed out that they would just be replacing one invasive species nightmare with another. But it shows the level of out-of-the-box thinking that was going on. The academic debate here often touches upon the psychology of pest control. Why do humans, when faced with an overwhelming natural force, resort to such theatrical and often counterproductive violence? Some sociologists suggest it's a way of reasserting control and agency in a situation where you feel powerless. Blasting a warren with dynamite might not solve the rabbit problem, but for a brief, explosive moment it makes you feel like you are in charge. It's a performance of dominance over a creature that has consistently dominated you. You are living in this chaotic time. You might try some of these methods yourself. You buy the newfangled trap, you try the poison, you might even get your hands on some explosives. Your shed becomes an arsenal of failed weapons. Each one represents a burst of hope followed by the slow, grinding disappointment of failure. The land is littered with the evidence of this strange war. The craters from explosions, the tangled remains of a failed trap, the rusted drums of old chemicals. The rabbits, meanwhile, seem completely unfazed. They navigate around the traps. They avoid the poison baits. They dig new burrows right next to the ones you just blew up. They are learning. They are adapting. And you are getting tired. The frenzied energy of invention is giving way to a weary resignation. You have tried everything you can think of, and nothing has worked. The land is still bare, the rabbits are still here, and the future looks bleaker than ever. The flurry of desperate, often destructive, human activity eventually subsides into a kind of weary stalemate. You can't kill all the rabbits. You can't fence them out. You can't blow them all up. You are forced to live with them. But the consequences of their long reign are now becoming permanently etched into the face of the continent itself. The most profound and lasting of these scars is the loss of the soil. You don't need to be a scientist to see it. You just need to have lived here for the last few decades. You remember what the land used to be like. You remember the topsoil, dark and rich, held together by a thick mat of grass roots. Now that topsoil is gone. Let's walk to the highest point on your property, a small, rocky hill. Look out at the landscape. It has a washed-out, pale quality. The deep reds and browns of the earth have been replaced by a lighter, sandier tan. What you're seeing is the result of decades of unprecedented soil erosion. This is the critical long-term environmental legacy of the rabbit plague. Here's how it happened. First, as you've seen, the rabbits ate the vegetation. They ate the grasses, the shrubs, the seedlings, the living blanket that protected the soil. Second, their millions of burrows turned the top layer of the earth into a hollow, fragile crust. They destabilized the very structure of the land. Then the two great forces of Australian nature were unleashed upon this vulnerable landscape, wind and water. Think about the wind. On a hot, dry summer's day, a strong wind picks up. It used to be that the wind would just rustle the leaves and bend the grass. Now, it picks up the soil itself. You see it as a haze on the horizon at first, a reddish-brown cloud. Then it hits you, a full-blown dust storm. The sky turns a dark, apocalyptic orange. The sun is blotted out. The air is so thick with fine dust that you can barely breathe. It gets into your house, under the doors, through the window frames, leaving a fine layer of your former paddock on your kitchen table. These red snow events become terrifyingly common, stripping millions of tons of precious topsoil from the land and carrying it, in some cases, hundreds of miles out to sea. Then, think about the water. The drought inevitably breaks, and the rain comes. But it's not the gentle, soaking rain you pray for. It's a torrential downpour, a feature of this continent's climate. On healthy land, the vegetation and absorbent topsoil would act like a sponge, soaking up the water. But on your bare, compacted land, the water has nowhere to go. It runs across the surface, forming small rivulets, then streams, then raging torrents. It carves deep gashes into the landscape. This is sheet erosion and gully erosion. You can see a massive one from your hilltop vantage point. A deep, angry scar running through the middle of what was once your best field. It started as a small channel 20 years ago. Now it's a chasm, 20 feet deep and 50 feet wide, a canyon carved out of your own land. It is a permanent, irreversible wound. Here's a quirky, sad detail that illustrates the scale of this problem. In some parts of Australia, farmers had to raise the height of their fence posts, not because the fences were sinking, but because the ground level around them had dropped so significantly due to wind erosion. The original ground level was now a foot or more above the new barren surface. The land itself was literally blowing away. The academic debate here is ongoing and complex. Environmental historians and soil scientists work to quantify the exact amount of topsoil lost during this period. The estimates are astronomical, measured in the billions of tons. They use old photographs, survey records, and soil analysis to build a picture of the devastation. The key question they still grapple with is one of causality and contribution. How much of this erosion was solely due to rabbits, and how much was exacerbated by poor farming practices of the era, like overstocking with sheep and excessive land clearing? The consensus is that it was a catastrophic synergy. The farmers stripped the big trees, and the rabbits stripped everything else, leaving the soil completely defenseless. This loss of soil is not just a cosmetic problem. It's an economic and ecological catastrophe. The land has lost its fertility. Its ability to grow anything, native grasses or agricultural crops, is permanently diminished. The productivity of huge swaths of the country has been crippled for centuries to come. You walk back down from the hill, the gritty wind in your face. You feel the profound grief of a farmer who has watched his greatest asset, his land, die before his eyes. It was a sudden death. It was a slow, lingering illness, a wasting away. Thomas Austin's 24 rabbits didn't just eat the plants. They ate the soil. They ate the very foundation of the landscape, leaving behind a depleted, fragile, and permanently scarred continent. This is their most enduring legacy, a legacy of dust. The devastation is not just measured in bare earth and lost topsoil. There is another, quieter tragedy unfolding in silent, ravaged bush. While all eyes have been on the rabbits and their impact on agriculture, other creatures have been paying the ultimate price. The rabbit plague is also a story of extinction. You are walking through the scrubby, altered landscape that is your home now. You stop and try to remember what other animals used to be here. You remember small, hopping creatures much more delicate than kangaroos. You remember shy, nocturnal animals you do occasionally glimpse in the moonlight. You don't see them anymore. They have vanished as surely as the native grasses have. This is the story of Australia's native fauna, the unique, often bizarre, and wonderful animals that evolved here in isolation. Many of them were small to medium-sized mammals, roughly in the same size category as a rabbit. They were an easy target. This is the crucial ecological principle of competitive exclusion. Two species competing for the same limited resources cannot coexist. The rabbit, with its aggressive breeding and voracious appetite, was the ultimate competitor. Let's meet some of the victims. First, there's the lesser bilby. You've probably never heard of it. Nobody has seen one alive since the 1950s. It was a small, desert-dwelling marsupial with silky fur and long ears. It was, by all accounts, a gentle, nocturnal creature. The rabbits ate its food source of roots and seeds and likely took over its burrows. With its home and its dinner gone, the lesser bilby simply faded away. It is now extinct. Then there's the pig-footed bandicoot, a truly strange little animal, described by early naturalists as having feet that resembled those of a tiny pig. It was a delicate creature of the arid plains. It too disappeared as the rabbit wave swept through, its habitat destroyed, its food sources obliterated. It is also now extinct. The list goes on. Several species of nail-tail wallabies and hare wallabies, small, graceful macropods, were driven to extinction. They were grazers directly competing with the rabbits for every last blade of grass. In a battle of appetites, they never stood a chance. The most famous of these victims, the poster child for the rabbit-induced crisis, is the greater bilby, a cousin of the extinct lesser one. You might know it as the rabbit-eared bandicoot. It's a beautiful, charismatic animal with enormous, delicate ears and a long, tufted tail. It was once found across 70% of the Australian continent. Now it is a critically endangered species, confined to a few isolated pockets in the harsh deserts of the interior. The rabbits are the primary reason for its decline. Here's a quirky and heartbreaking detail about the bilby. In a perfect, ironic twist, conservationists in Australia now promote the Easter bilby instead of the Easter bunny. You can buy chocolate bilbies with the proceeds going towards conservation efforts to save the very animal that the original Easter bunny helped to destroy. It's a small act of cultural reclamation in a long and tragic war. The rabbits caused this devastation in two main ways. The first was direct competition for food and shelter. They simply outate and outbred the native animals. The second way was more indirect, but just as deadly. The widespread poisoning campaigns, the scorched earth policies designed to kill rabbits, were not selective. The strychnine baits that killed rabbits also killed any native herbivore that ate them. The native carnivores, like the koalas, that might have eaten the poisoned rabbits, were also killed by secondary poisoning. This leads to a contentious and still debated area of historical ecology. Exactly how many species were lost? The records from the 19th and early 20th centuries are poor. It's highly likely that numerous smaller, less conspicuous species, rodents, small marsupials, insects, vanished without ever being properly documented. We are haunted by these ghost extinctions. We know something is missing from the ecosystem, but we don't know exactly what it was. Scientists try to reconstruct these lost faunas by studying subfossil remains found in caves, piecing together a picture of a richer, more diverse world that is gone forever. You feel this loss in a personal way. The bush is quieter now, less varied. The rich tapestry of life has been replaced by a monotonous landscape dominated by a single, foreign species. It's not just the plants that have been simplified. The animal life has been impoverished too. The intricate web of interactions, predator and prey, grazer and grass, has been torn apart. You might find a skull half buried in the dust. It's small and delicate. It's not a rabbit skull. You don't know what it is. You hold it in your hand, a fragile relic of a lost world. This small, forgotten bone is a testament to the unseen casualties of the rabbit plague. The rabbits didn't just conquer the land. They systematically, unrelentlessly erased the creatures that had called it home for millions of years. The full ecological cost of those first 24 rabbits is still being calculated, one forgotten species at a time. The years have rolled on. It is now the mid-20th century. You've lived through the initial invasion, the desperate counterattacks, the grand failure of the fences, and the long, grim period of resignation. The rabbit is a permanent feature of the Australian landscape, a furry symbol of ecological failure. But science has not stood still. In laboratories far from the dusty plains, a new kind of weapon is being forged. A weapon that is invisible, silent, and its creators hope unbelievably deadly. The world has changed. 2 world wars have accelerated the pace of scientific discovery. The fields of virology and epidemiology are coming of age. Scientists now understand that the greatest killers on Earth are not lions or tigers, but microscopic pathogens. And a new, radical idea begins to take hold in the scientific community. What if you could turn a disease into a weapon against the rabbit? This is the dawn of biological control, or biocontrol. The search begins for a disease that is perfectly tailored for the job. It needs to meet several crucial criteria. First, it must be highly lethal to the European rabbit, or ecological unicalis. Second, and this is the absolute most important point, it must be completely harmless to all other animals, especially Australia's native fauna and, of course, humans and domestic livestock. The memory of the indiscriminate poison campaigns looms large. Nobody wants to make that mistake again. The search leads scientists to South America, where they find a virus called Myxomatosis. In its native host, the South American tape-tea rabbit, it causes only a mild, non-fatal illness. But when it infects the European rabbit, the very same species overrunning Australia, it is a killer. It causes a disease called Myxomatosis, which is swift, brutal, and almost 100% fatal. It seems like the perfect candidate, the silver bullet. This is the key historical moment, the decision to intentionally introduce a disease into a continent. It's a threshold crossing, a step into a new and frightening realm of ecological management. The man at the forefront of this research in Australia is Sir Frank Macfarlane Burnet, a brilliant virologist who would later win a Nobel Prize. He and his team at the CSIRO, the Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organization, begin a series of exhaustive and painstaking tests. For years, they conduct trials in secure, contained laboratories. They expose every Australian animal they can get their hands onto the virus. Wombats, kangaroos, koalas, possums, echidnas. They tested on sheep, cattle, horses, and dogs. They even tested on themselves. Scientists voluntarily allow themselves to be injected with the virus to prove its safety to humans. The results are consistent and conclusive. Myxomatosis affects only the European rabbit. It is to a degree of certainty that satisfies the scientific community, species-specific. Here's a quirky detail about this research phase. Public opinion was deeply divided and skeptical. After decades of failed miracle cures, people were wary. Cartoonists drew pictures of monstrous, mutated rabbits with horns and wings, the supposed result of the new rabbit disease. Farmers worried it would infect their livestock, no matter what the scientists said. There was a genuine fear that the scientists were about to unleash a new plague, one that could be even worse than the rabbits themselves. The academic and ethical debate was, and still is, intense. Is it morally right to deliberately inflict a disease on an animal population, even a pest? This is a question that philosophers and ethicists continue to grapple with. Proponents argued that it was a merciful death compared to the slow, agonizing death by starvation that millions of rabbits were already suffering. They also pointed to the immense suffering of the native animals and the destruction of the environment. In their view, inaction was also a choice to let the devastation continue. Opponents argued that it was a dangerous, arrogant intervention in nature, with potential unforeseen consequences that could not be predicted. Despite the controversy, the government, desperate for a solution, gives the green light. The decision is made to proceed with a field trial. In 1950, a team of scientists travels to the Murray River, on the border of Victoria and New South Wales. This area is teeming with rabbits. Their plan is to capture a small number of rabbits, infect them with Myxomatosis in a mobile caravan laboratory, and then release them back into the wild to spread the disease. You are there watching this strange new experiment unfold. You see the scientists in their white coats, working with needles and cages. It doesn't look like a war. It looks like a medical procedure. There are no explosions, no poisons, just a quiet, clinical release of a few sick animals back into the bush. At first, it seems to be another failure. The disease spreads slowly, fizzling out in small, localized pockets. The scientists are disheartened. It seems their silver bullet is a dud. They pack up their equipment, ready to admit defeat. And then, something happens that nobody had fully anticipated. The mosquitoes arrive. Just as the scientists are about to write off Myxomatosis as another failed experiment, nature intervenes in a spectacular and terrifying way. The summer of 1950-51 brings unusually heavy rains to the Murray-Darling Basin. The rivers flood their banks, creating vast, shallow wetlands. And these wetlands become the perfect breeding ground for millions upon millions of mosquitoes. This is the unforeseen variable that turns the tide of the war. The scientists knew that the virus could be spread by insects like mosquitoes and fleas, which act as mechanical vectors. They carry the virus on their mouthparts from a sick rabbit to a healthy one. But they had not anticipated a mosquito plague of this magnitude. You are living near the river, and you witness this firsthand. The air at dusk is thick with a humming, whining cloud of mosquitoes. It's a biblical plague in its own right. But these mosquitoes are not just a nuisance. They are an army of microscopic syringes, and they are about to become the delivery system for the deadliest weapon the rabbits have ever faced. The mosquitoes bite the few sick rabbits that the scientists had released. Their mouthparts become contaminated with the myxomavirus. Then they fly off and bite a healthy rabbit, and another, and another. With millions of mosquitoes flying every night, the virus is no longer spreading slowly from rabbit to rabbit. It is being broadcast across the landscape in a massive, coordinated airborne missile. The effect is explosive. It's like a biological firestorm. Within weeks, the riverbanks are littered with the bodies of dead and dying rabbits. The disease, which had been fizzling out, suddenly erupts with incredible virulence. This is the pivotal moment of the biocontrol story. You see the rabbits first. They become listless, their eyes swollen and puffy. Lumps or myxomas appear on their heads and bodies. They become blind and disoriented. They lose their fear of humans. You might see a sick rabbit sitting in the middle of a road, oblivious to your approach. Within a day or two it will be dead. The sight is grim and deeply unsettling. The smell of death hangs in the air. The sheer scale of the mortality is almost incomprehensible. It is a silent, creeping apocalypse. Where there were once hundreds of rabbits, there are now none. The land falls quiet. The news spreads like wildfire across the country. Farmers and graziers, hearing of the success on the Murray River, take matters into their own hands. They travel for hundreds of miles to collect the bodies of sick rabbits. They take them back to their own properties and place them near the warrens, hoping to start their own local epidemics. Government agencies begin a coordinated national campaign, deliberately introducing the virus into rabbit populations across the continent. The results are staggering. In the 2 years following that first release, the Australian rabbit population crashes. From an estimated 600 million, it plummets to around 100 million, a 90% reduction. It is the most successful vertebrate pest control program ever undertaken in human history. Here's a quirky and telling detail from this period. The economic impact was immediate and massive. With the grazing pressure from rabbits suddenly lifted, pastures began to recover almost overnight. The wool and meat industries, which had been crippled for decades, saw an estimated economic benefit that was, in the first few years alone, more than 50 times the entire cost of the research program. The scientists who had been scorned as dangerous meddlers were now hailed as national heroes. Of course, the debate about the ethics of Myxomatosis did not go away. While many saw it as a miracle, others were horrified by the immense suffering it caused. Animal welfare groups condemned it as cruel. The debate continues to this day, with some historians and ethicists arguing that the success came at an unacceptable moral cost. They ask, does the scale of an ecological problem justify a solution that involves such widespread and visible animal suffering? There is no easy answer. For you, living on the land, the feeling is one of overwhelming relief, mixed with a sense of awe and a little fear. You have witnessed a power far greater than any dynamite or poison. The landscape begins to heal. You see native grasses sprouting in places you haven't seen them in your lifetime. The creeks run clear. There is a sense of a great weight being lifted from the continent. The invisible weapon has worked. It has worked better than anyone could have dreamed. The rabbit, the invincible conqueror, has finally been brought to its knees. It seems like the war is over. It seems like you have won. But evolution is a patient and relentless force. And in the quiet burrows among the 100 million survivors, a counterattack is already being prepared. The victor feels absolute. The silent, empty paddocks are a testament to the power of Myxomatosis. For the first time in generations, you can walk your land without the constant, unnerving presence of rabbits. The healing is visible. The grass is returning. The soil seems to be stabilizing. It feels like the end of the story. But in the world of biology, there is never really an end. There is only change and adaptation. You have just witnessed a massive evolutionary selection event. You didn't kill all the rabbits. You killed 90% of them. The 10% that survived are, by definition, different. They are the tough ones, the lucky ones, the ones with some quirk in their immune system that allowed them to withstand the viral storm. This is where the story takes a fascinating turn, moving from ecology to genetics. The rabbit's great counterattack is not fought with teeth or claws, but with DNA. It's a silent, invisible war being waged in the bloodstreams of the survivors. What you start to notice over the next few years is subtle. You see a rabbit, then another. Then you see a family of young ones. They are back. Not in the plague numbers of before, but they are undeniably present. And they look healthy. Two things are happening simultaneously. Firstly, the rabbits are evolving resistance. The small population of survivors, the 10% with natural partial immunity, begin to breathe. They pass on their resilient genes to their offspring. With each new generation, the overall genetic resistance of the rabbit population increases. This is classic natural selection in action, playing out at hyperspeed right in front of you. Secondly, the virus itself is evolving. This is a crucial and often misunderstood part of the story. A virus that is too deadly, that kills its host too quickly, can actually be less successful. It doesn't have enough time to spread to new hosts. So, less lethal or attenuated strains of the Myxomatosis begin to emerge and become dominant. These strains still make the rabbits sick, but they don't kill them as quickly or as often. This gives the mosquitoes more time to bite the sick rabbit and spread the less lethal, but more transmissible, virus to other rabbits. So you have a two-pronged counterattack. The rabbits are becoming stronger, and the virus is becoming weaker. It's a perfect example of co-evolution. The host and the pathogen are locked in a biological arms race, each adapting to the other. By the 1970s and 1980s, the effectiveness of Myxomatosis has plummeted. The mortality rate, once over 99% in some areas, drops to around 40-60%. And a mortality rate of 50% is not enough to control a breeding machine like the rabbit. The population begins to climb again. You see the evidence all around you. The familiar signs of rabbit damage start to reappear. The nibbled seedlings, the bare patches of earth, the burrow entrances. It's a farmer's nightmare, a case of ecological déjà vu. The monster you thought you had slain is rising from the grave. The population swells from its low of 100 million back up to 200 million, then 300 million. It's not the plague of the 1940s, but it's a serious, escalating problem. The silver bullet is tarnished. Here's a quirky detail that emerged from this period. Scientists began to actively search for and release more virulent, hotter strains of Myxomatosis, trying to stay one step ahead of the rabbit's evolving resistance. They would find a particularly nasty strain in one part of the country, cultivate it in the lab, and then release it in another, hoping to give the local rabbit population a shock. It became a constant battle of trying to update the software of the virus to overcome the rabbit's improving hardware. The academic debate here focuses on the long-term sustainability of biocontrol. Myxomatosis was not a permanent solution. It was a temporary reprieve. This has led to a major shift in thinking in pest management. The idea of a single silver bullet solution has been largely abandoned. Modern ecologists now talk about integrated pest management, a strategy that uses a combination of different tools: biocontrol, targeted poisoning, habitat modification, fencing, to keep a pest population below a certain damage threshold. The goal is no longer eradication, which is seen as impossible, but long-term, sustainable management. You are living through the disappointment of this realization. The miracle cure has faded. The hard-won victory is slipping through your fingers. It's a frustrating and demoralizing time. It seems that for every clever solution humanity devises, the rabbit has an even cleverer response. The scientists, however, have not given up. They have learned a valuable lesson from Myxomatosis. They know that biocontrol can work, but it needs to be a continuous effort. The biological arms race requires new weapons. Back in the high-security labs, the search has already begun for a new virus, another invisible assassin to unleash upon the resurgent rabbit armies. The next round of biological warfare is about to begin. The 1982 and early 1990s are a period of grim familiarity. The rabbit numbers are climbing steadily, and the old methods of control are proving increasingly ineffective. Myxomatosis is still out there, causing seasonal outbreaks, but it no longer has the apocalyptic power it once did. The land is once again showing the strain. Soil erosion is accelerating, and the fragile gains made by native plants and animals are being reversed. The nation needs a new weapon. This time, the scientists know exactly what they're looking for. They need another virus that is highly specific to the European rabbit. They also know they need one with a different mode of transmission, something that isn't so reliant on insects like mosquitoes, which limits its effectiveness in the vast, arid zones of Australia where insects are scarce. The search leads them to China, where in 1984, a new, highly virulent disease is identified. It is wiping out populations of European rabbits that have been introduced into China for fur farming. The culprit is a tiny, incredibly tough virus called ecological. The disease it causes is named rabbit hemorrhagic disease, or RHD. It's also known as rabbit calicivirus disease, or CD. This virus is, from a pest control perspective, a work of art. It is hyperlethal, killing up to 95% of infected rabbits. Its death is incredibly swift, often occurring within 24-48 hours of infection, which raises fewer animal welfare concerns than the prolonged suffering caused by myxomatosis. Most importantly, it spreads differently. It is highly contagious, spreading through direct contact between rabbits or via contaminated food, water, or even the bodies of dead rabbits. This means it can spread effectively in the dry, desert regions where Myxomatosis struggled. And crucially, after years of rigorous testing on a vast range of other species, it appears to be even more specific to rabbits than Myxomatosis was. It seems to be the perfect candidate for the second round of biological warfare. This is the key historical development of the late 20th century in this long war. The Australian government, having learned from the public scare surrounding Myxomatosis, embarks on a massive public consultation program. But the memory of the Myxomatosis miracle is strong. The agricultural lobby is desperate for a new solution. After years of evaluation and testing, the decision is made to proceed with a field trial. But this time they are going to be extra careful. No accidental escapes. The chosen location for the trial is Wardang Island, a barren, windswept island in the Spencer Gulf off the coast of South Australia. It is seen as the perfect natural containment facility. It has a large, healthy population of wild rabbits, but it's far enough from the mainland to prevent any unauthorized spread of the virus. In 1995, a team of scientists set up a high-security quarantine facility on the island. You can imagine the scene, a remote island. Men in full body biohazard suits, a sense of immense caution and scientific precision. This is not the shoestring, caravan laboratory operation of the 1950s. This is modern, high-stakes science. They introduce the RHD virus into the island's rabbit population. The effect is immediate and devastating. Just as the lab tests predicted, the rabbit population on Wardang Island collapses. Within weeks, almost all of them are gone. The trial is a spectacular textbook success. The virus is a killer. Here's a quirky detail from this carefully planned experiment. The scientists were not just studying the virus. They were also studying its vectors. They had cages of rabbits set up at various distances from the main outbreak, trying to determine exactly how the virus was spreading. They found that flies, particularly bush flies, were acting as mechanical vectors, just like the mosquitoes with Myxomatosis. After feeding on the carcass of an infected rabbit, a fly could carry the virus on its body and transport it to a healthy rabbit. The plan is to continue studying the virus on the island for another year or two, gathering more data before considering a coordinated, official release on the mainland. The government wants to get this exactly right. They want to control the narrative, control the release, and avoid any mistakes. But the virus has other ideas. The academic debate here focuses on the concept of acceptable risk in scientific research. The Wardang Island trial was designed to be as safe as possible. But when you are dealing with a highly contagious, microscopic entity, can you ever truly guarantee 100% containment? Some critics argue that releasing such a virus, even on an island, is an unacceptable gamble. Proponents argue that the risks of inaction, the continued destruction of the Australian environment by rabbits, were far greater than the managed risks of the trial. On Wardang Island, the scientists are methodically collecting their data, pleased with their successful and contained experiment. They are in control. Everything is going according to plan. On the mainland just across the water, the rabbit population is thriving, blissfully unaware of the doom that is being prepared for them. The stage is set for a calm, orderly, government-sanctioned release of the new superweapon. But the second biological war is about to start with a jailbreak. The year is 1995. On Wardang Island, the scientists continue their careful, meticulous work. They are confident in their quarantine protocols. The island is their laboratory, a sealed environment. But nature has a way of mocking human confidence. The story of rabbit hemorrhagic disease in Australia, a controlled release. It's the story of an escape. The exact details of how the virus jumped from the island to the mainland are still shrouded in a bit of mystery. A classic case of a story that has become a modern legend. The official, most likely explanation is mundane but effective insects. Imagine a hot, windy day on the Spencer Gulf. A strong northwesterly wind is blowing from the mainland towards the island. Bush flies, drawn by the smell of the thousands of dead rabbits on Wardang, are swarming. They feed on the infected carcasses, their bodies and mouthparts becoming contaminated with the incredibly resilient caliciferous. Then, the wind changes. It starts blowing from the island back towards the mainland, a distance of just a few kilometers at its narrowest point. The flies, which are not strong flyers, are essentially carried on the wind, a living, buzzing cloud of viral vectors. They land near the coast, at a place called Point Pierce on the York Peninsula, and there they find a new, thriving population of unsuspecting rabbits. That's the scientific theory. The more romantic, and likely apocryphal, version of the story involves a fishing boat, a seagull, or even a daring farmer who supposedly snuck onto the island at night to liberate a dead rabbit. The truth is probably less dramatic, but the result is the same. The virus is out. The first sign that something is wrong comes from the mainland. Farmers on the York Peninsula start reporting a sudden, massive die-off of rabbits on their properties. It's not Myxomatosis. The symptoms are different. The rabbits are just dead, often found in a placid-looking state, as if they just laid down and died, sometimes with a spot of bloody discharge from the nose. It's the signature of our HD. This is the key moment of the second biocontrol saga. The genie is out of the bottle. The carefully planned multi-year, multi-million-dollar government rollout strategy is now completely irrelevant. The virus is on the loose and spreading under its own power, far faster than any government committee could ever approve. The reaction in the scientific and political community is a mad scramble. At first, there's a degree of panic, but it's quickly replaced by a kind of pragmatic resignation. They can't put the virus back on the island. The only thing they can do now is track it. And track it they do. The spread of RHD becomes one of the most closely monitored animal epidemics in history. Scientists and local land care groups set up a vast network to report and map its progress. The virus moves like a storm front across the country. It races through South Australia, into New South Wales, Victoria, and Queensland. It thrives in the hot, dry conditions of the interior, the very areas where Myxomatosis was weakest. The results are, once again, spectacular. Rabbit populations in the arid zones crashed by 80-95%. It's Wardang Island, but on a continental scale. Here's a quirky detail about this unauthorized spread. Because the virus got out before the government had a chance to officially sanction it, it led to a strange legal and public relations situation. For months, the government was in the awkward position of having to publicly state that they could neither condone nor condemn the spread of the virus, while privately, scientists and farmers were celebrating its incredible effectiveness. The virus was, for a time, an outlaw, a vigilante pathogen doing the job that the bureaucracy couldn't. The academic debate here is fascinating, focusing on the sociology of science and public policy. The RHD escape is a perfect case study of the limits of human control over complex natural systems. Did the scientists fail in their containment? Or does it prove that in the real world a soft release, even an accidental one, is sometimes more effective than a rigid, centrally planned one? It raises profound questions about risk, control, and the unpredictable nature of biological agents. The escape, while professionally embarrassing for the scientists involved, was ultimately a stunning success for the project's overall goal. You are living through this second wave of relief. Once again, you see the land respond. The pressure comes off. The native vegetation gets a second chance, another breathing space. The rabbit numbers plummet. The combination of Myxomatosis, which is more effective in the cool, wet coastal areas, and RHD, which dominates the hot, dry interior, creates a powerful one-two punch. For a time, it seems like humanity and its viral allies have finally got the upper hand. But the lesson of Myxomatosis looms large. No victory in this war is ever final. The rabbits that survive the RHD plague are, once again, the genetically resistant ones. The arms race has not ended. A new chapter has just begun. The dust has settled from the RHD virus's great escape. The rabbit numbers are down again, and the land is enjoying another fragile reprieve. But this time, the victory celebration is more subdued. We've been here before. We know that this is not the end. This lull in the fighting provides a moment for reflection, and with it, the ethical and philosophical debates that have been simmering for a century come to a full boil. You are no longer just a farmer fighting a pest. You are now a citizen in a world grappling with the profound consequences of biological warfare. The questions are no longer just how do we kill them. They are should we, and what is the cost? The central, 永无休止的伦理争议, revolves around the use of disease as a tool for conservation and agriculture. On one side of the argument, you have the pragmatists. These are the farmers, the agricultural scientists, and many conservation ecologists. From your perspective on the land, the argument is simple and powerful. You have seen the devastation with your own eyes. You have seen the soil blow away, the native plants vanish, and the unique local animals starve. You have seen your own livelihood brought to the brink of collapse. For you, the rabbits are not a natural part of the ecosystem. They are a cancer. And when dealing with a cancer, you use the most effective treatments available. Chemotherapy is a poison, but you use it to save the patient. Myxomatosis and RHD are horrific diseases, but they are used to save an entire continent's ecosystem from collapse. From this viewpoint, the suffering of the rabbits, while regrettable, is unnecessary evil, a justifiable cost to prevent a far greater catastrophe. This is the utilitarian argument, the greatest good for the greatest number of species. On the other side of the debate, you have the animal welfare advocates and some environmental ethicists. They argue from a different moral framework. Their position is that it is fundamentally wrong for humans to intentionally inflict suffering and disease on any animal, regardless of whether it is labeled a pest. They point to the grim reality of a rabbit dying from Myxomatosis, the blindness, the swelling, the slow, lingering death. They argue that we, as the species that caused the problem in the first place by introducing the rabbits, have a moral responsibility to find a more humane solution. They ask difficult questions. Does our economic interest or our desire to restore a pristine environment give us the right to cause such immense suffering? They suggest that widespread, deliberate cruelty brutalizes not just the animals, but ourselves as well. This side of the argument forces you to confront the visceral reality of what biocontrol means, to look beyond the convenient statistics of population decline. Here's a quirky but important tangent in this debate: the pet rabbit problem. The Rh2 virus doesn't distinguish between a wild rabbit devastating a national park and a child's beloved pet bunny named Fluffy. When Rh2 got loose, it killed thousands of domestic rabbits across Australia. Vets were inundated with frantic pet owners. This brought the ethical dilemma into the cities and suburbs in a very personal way. It's one thing to support the release of a virus in the distant outback. It's another thing entirely when it kills your family pet. This led to the development and urgent rollout of a vaccine for Rh2 for domestic rabbits, creating the strange situation where the government was actively spreading a disease with one hand and providing the cure for it with the other. This entire debate is still a hot topic in academic circles. Philosophers use the rabbit plague as a case study to explore complex ideas like speciesism, the idea that it's wrong to give preference to one species over another, the moral standing of individual animals versus entire ecosystems, and the responsibilities of humans as stewards of the planet. There are no easy answers, and respected scholars can be found on all sides of the issue. As you stand on your land, you are living in the middle of this philosophical minefield. You feel the pull of both arguments. You look at a patch of newly sprouted native orchids, a species you thought was gone forever, and you feel a surge of gratitude for the virus that made this possible. Then you might see a single sick rabbit huddled and trembling, and you feel a pang of pity and a sense of guilt. This is the complex legacy of Australia's rabbit war. It has forced a national conversation about our relationship with the natural world and the moral lines we are willing to cross to fix our own mistakes. The battle against the rabbit is not just fought in the fields and in the labs. It is also fought in the hearts and minds of people like you, trying to balance the competing demands of pragmatism, compassion, and responsibility. The war goes on, and the debate continues. The present day, the early 21st century. You are standing in the same spot your great-great-grandparents stood over a century ago. The world is unrecognizably different. There are cars on the roads, lights in the towns, and a world of information in a small device in your pocket. But some things haven't changed. You look out across the land and you see a rabbit. The rabbits of today are not the same as the ones that first hopped out of Thomas Austin's crate. They are the descendants of survivors, the hardened veterans of a 150-year war. They are the products of an intense, accelerated evolutionary process. They are, in a word, smarter. This is the current state of play. The rabbit population is held in a tense, dynamic equilibrium. The number hovers somewhere between 200 and 300 million. It's a huge number, but it's a fraction of the plague era peak. This is due to the ongoing pressure from the two viral superstars, Myxomatosis and Rh2. They are a permanent part of the Australian ecosystem now. But the rabbits have adapted. Just as they evolved genetic resistance to Myxomatosis, they are now evolving resistance to the original strain of Rh2. The mortality rates are slowly dropping. In response, scientists are constantly playing catch-up. In 2017, a new, more potent strain of Rh2, known as HDV2, was officially released after also escaping quarantine prematurely in a classic echo of the past. This new strain is more effective against the rabbits that had become resistant to the first one, and it can also kill very young kittens which were often immune to the original Rh2. So today's rabbit lives in a dangerous world. It has to navigate a landscape filled with multiple, lethal viruses. This constant pressure has changed their behavior. This is a key point in modern rabbit ecology. There is evidence to suggest that rabbits in high virus areas have adapted to breed earlier and faster. The evolutionary pressure selects for a live fast, die young strategy. If your chances of surviving to adulthood are low, the best strategy is to reproduce as quickly as possible. You, as a modern land manager, have a whole new arsenal of tools, but the fundamental challenge remains the same. You use sophisticated GPS mapping to identify rabbit hotspots. You use drones to survey remote areas. You have access to more targeted and humane poisons, like pindun, which can be used more safely around native wildlife. Fencing technology has improved dramatically. But all these tools are just for management, for keeping the numbers down to a dull roar. The idea of complete eradication has been almost entirely abandoned. It is considered a scientific impossibility. Here's a quirky and very modern twist to the story. The rabbit's role in the ecosystem is now being reevaluated in a more complex light. After 150 years, the rabbit is, for better or worse, a part of the landscape. And a new problem has emerged: predator switching. In the arid zones, introduced predators like feral cats and red foxes have come to rely on rabbits as their primary food source. When the rabbit population is suddenly crashed by a new virus, these predators don't just starve. They switch their attention to hunting Australia's vulnerable native animals, many of which are already critically endangered. This has led to one of the most complex and debated management dilemmas today. Some conservationists argue that in certain specific ecosystems, a low-level population of rabbits might actually be necessary to act as a buffer, drawing predator attention away from native species. This is a hugely controversial idea. Can an invasive species ever be considered a useful part of the ecosystem? It's an uncomfortable question that highlights how deeply the rabbits have woven themselves into the fabric of the Australian environment. The simple narrative of good native animals versus bad invasive rabbits has become much more complicated. So the war against the rabbit has become a high-tech, endlessly complex, and permanent state of affairs. It's a war of attrition, fought with genetic sequencing, satellite maps, and computer modeling. The government and researchers are locked in this perpetual arms race with a creature that has proven to be one of the most resilient and adaptable animals on the planet. You look at the rabbit nibbling on a shoot of grass. It is a symbol of a problem that will likely never be solved, only managed. It is a living reminder of a simple mistake made a long time ago. It is a testament to the incredible power of evolution. And it is a permanent resident of your land. The fight your ancestors started is now yours to continue, not with the hope of a final victory, but with the weary, pragmatic goal of simply holding the line. Let's take a final step back. We've walked through more than 160 years of this strange, protracted war, from a single nostalgic whim to a continental ecological crisis. Now, as the evening closes in on this long story, it's time to tally the score, to look at the full, complex legacy of those 24 rabbits. What did they truly leave behind? First, and most visibly, is the physical legacy etched into the land itself. You can see it in the deep gullies carved by erosion into what were once flat plains. You see it in the pale, impoverished soil, stripped of its rich, dark top layer. You see it in the simplified, monotonous vegetation of the bush, where once there was a rich tapestry of hundreds of different plant species. This physical scarring is perhaps the most permanent reminder of the plague years. Some of these landscapes may never fully recover to what they were. The ghost of the rabbit's appetite will haunt them for centuries. Then there is the biological legacy, the ledger of life and death. On the debit side, the list is heartbreaking. The extinctions are permanent. The lesser bilby and the pig-footed bandicoot are gone forever. Their unique evolutionary stories, millions of years in the making, were snuffed out in less than a century. Dozens of other species, from wallabies to native rodents, were either wiped out completely or pushed to the brink, their populations shrinking into tiny, fragmented remnants. This is the great impoverishment, the loss of biological richness. On the credit side of the biological ledger, strangely enough, are the rabbits themselves and the viruses that hunt them. Australia is now home to a unique co-evolutionary arms race. The rabbits here are genetically distinct from their European ancestors, forged in the crucible of Myxomatosis and RHD. And the viruses here have also evolved into unique strains. Australia has, inadvertently, become a giant, open-air laboratory for studying evolution in real time. This is a key point for modern science. The rabbit plague, for all its horror, has provided invaluable data and insights into how diseases and populations adapt to one another. Next is the economic legacy. The initial cost was astronomical. measured in the billions of dollars of lost agricultural production and the immense cost of the control measures, the fences, the bounties, the poisoning campaigns, the Tobiah control programs, Myxomatosis under HD, have also yielded a massive economic return, saving the agricultural sector billions in the long run. The rabbit forced Australian farming to adapt and innovate, leading to new land management techniques and a much deeper, if hard one, understanding of the country's fragile environment. And here's a quirky but significant part of that legacy: the Akubra hat. The iconic felt hat, a symbol of the Australian outback, was traditionally made from rabbit fur. For decades, the rabbit plague, while a curse for the farmer, was a boon for the hat maker. The industry thrived on the seemingly endless supply of its main raw material. It's a strange irony that a national symbol is made from the skin of a national pest. Finally, there is the cultural and psychological legacy, which is perhaps the most complex of all. The rabbit war has seeped into the Australian psyche. It fostered a culture of gritty, make-do resilience in the bush, but also a deep-seated sense of vulnerability. It taught the nation a harsh lesson about its place in the world. Australia was not a new version of Europe. It was a unique, ancient, and finely balanced land, and it could be broken. The academic debate here tries to frame this legacy in a global context. The Australian rabbit plague is now the textbook case study, taught in universities all over the world, of what can happen when humans meddle with ecosystems they don't understand. It's a cautionary tale of invasive species, of the dangers of nostalgia, and of the law of unintended consequences. Was Thomas Austin a villain? Most historians would say no. He was simply a man of his time, acting on a common sentiment with a level of ignorance that was typical for his era. He is a symbol not of malice, but of a profound and catastrophic failure of foresight. So you stand there under the Southern Cross, looking at a landscape shaped by this long and complicated history. Those original 24 rabbits are long gone, but their descendants, their legacies are everywhere. They are in the dust beneath your feet, in the silence where a native creature used to be, in the genetic code of the survivors, and in the hard-earned wisdom of the people who now call this land home. The simple wish for a touch of home unleashed a force that remade a continent. We've arrived at the end of our long journey, but the story itself, of course, has no real end. It simply continues into the future. And as we look at this story from a distance, one final unsettling question remains. Have we truly learned the lesson? The tale of the 24 rabbits feels like it should be a singular, monumental warning. A story so stark and devastating that we would never repeat it. And yet the same pattern plays out again and again, all over the world, albeit often in less dramatic fashion. The core of the story is about humanity's enduring belief that we can improve nature, that we can move species around like furniture to suit our own needs and whims, without consequence. Think about the cane toad, another famous Australian ecological disaster. Introduced deliberately in the 1930s to control a beetle in Queensland's sugarcane fields, it failed to control the beetle, but went on to become a toxic, invasive plague in its own right, killing native predators that try to eat it. The parallels are chilling. A well-intentioned introduction, a fundamental misunderstanding of a complex ecosystem, and a catastrophic, continent-spanning outcome. Or look at the Burmese pythons currently devastating the Florida Everglades in the United States. Released into the wild by pet owners, these giant constrictors have decimated native mammal populations. Or the zebra mussels that have clogged the waterways of North America, hitchhiking in the ballast water ships. The pattern is the same. A species is moved from A to B, finds an empty niche with no natural enemies, and explodes. This is the great, overarching theme that the rabbit plague so perfectly illustrates. In our modern, interconnected world, the opportunities for such introductions are greater than ever. Every shipping container, every airplane, every tourist carries the potential for a new biological invasion. Here's a quirky, modern-day detail that shows just how easily it can happen. In many parts of the world, including Australia, authorities at airports and ports are in a constant battle against hitchhiker pests. They find exotic insects in shipments of timber, foreign snails on imported pot plants, and even, in one famous case, a live snake in the landing gear of an airplane. The vigilance required to prevent the next rabbit is immense and never-ending. The academic field that studies this is called invasion biology, and it's one of the most critical and fastest-growing areas of environmental science. The central debate within this field is about shifting from a reactive to a proactive approach. For centuries, our response to invasive species has been reactive. We wait until a problem becomes a crisis, like the rabbits, and then spend billions trying to clean up the mess. The push now is for better prediction and prevention. Scientists are developing complex models to try and predict which species are likely to become invasive and which ecosystems are most vulnerable. But it's an incredibly difficult science. Predicting the future of a complex system is always a gamble. The story of the rabbit forces us to confront a fundamental humility. It teaches us that ecosystems are not simple machines that we can deconstruct and reassemble. They are intricate, chaotic, and mysterious webs of relationships built up over millions of years. A single, seemingly insignificant tug on one thread can unravel the entire tapestry in ways we could never foresee. Thomas Austin's wish was, at its heart, a failure of imagination. He couldn't imagine a world without predators. He couldn't imagine the power of exponential growth. He couldn't imagine a landscape eaten down to bare dirt. He saw a rabbit as a simple, familiar object. He failed to see it as a complex biological agent with its own evolutionary imperatives. So, as you stand on this land today, you are the keeper of this lesson. You know that the war against the rabbit will never be won with a single silver bullet. It will be a perpetual dance of management, adaptation, and vigilance. And you know that the story is a profound reminder that the most dangerous threats often come in the most unassuming packages. The greatest floods can begin with the smallest of leaks. And a continental catastrophe, one that would last for centuries and cost billions of dollars, can begin with the simple, homesick wish of one man and 20 for little rabbits